Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey there.
Good morning.
Hi, this is Michelle from Brooklyn.
Monica is here from Belfast, Northern Ireland.
This is Jasmine from New Hampshire.
People, oh my goodness, from all over. We have Belgium, Spain, South Africa, China, Germany, Kosovo, Switzerland, Canada.
Each of our discussion leaders, I'm going to ask the same question and ask them to speak their truth to us. And so the question really is for you, Dolores, to think about, if you can think back in your life, can you tell us about a moment when you were so challenged by something that you were just ready to give up, that you just said, you know what, can't do it, I'm done. Let somebody else do it, I'm done. And I think we've all felt that, especially recently. What happened? You know, how did you push through? What did you call on? What did you call in to help you in that moment?
When I went down there to work with farm workers, then I thought, again, I had all the self-doubt. And I think this is what holds us back a lot, because we don't think we have the capacity or the skills, even if we want to help people. And in CSO, I did a lot of service work. You know, we help people out with immigration, police issues, school issues, etc. And Caesar used to write to me and say, you're doing too many services. You've got to organize people. So what happened when I went to, when we started the union, it was a whole different thing. It wasn't helping people. It was empowering people. You know, it was empowering, making them stand up for themselves. And that was like a whole different dynamic, you know. And he said, remember this, if they could have done it without you, it would have already happened. If they could have done it without you, it would have already happened. So I think that basically a lot of us, that's what holds us back, is again, we have the self-doubt, and then of course we don't know. But the other thing I learned in my journey of activism is that you don't have to know everything. So when I went to Sacramento to start passing these laws and came to the US Congress, I didn't know how you pass a law, but I asked people, right? So I think to sum it all up, the main thing that we need to do is kind of ignore the self-doubt that all of us have, you know, ask for help to know how to do things, knowing that we don't have the capacity. And the other thing is when you organize people, they give you the answers.
It was in the organizing that I saw with my mom and folks like my mom who said, no way, like we live here, we deserve dignity and justice, and we have a voice and something to say about it. I think that really woke me up in my younger years to understand what it means to build power even when you feel like you don't have any, when you don't feel like you have a say, or you don't feel like you know, people will hear you because you don't speak the language, because you're not a voter, because you don't own any part of the land, or whatever reason that, you know, we dismiss people, that despite those challenges, that people can stand up, that can demand space and ensure that their voice is heard regardless. And so growing up in that space with elders like elders in the community and people like my mom teaching me that, and then growing up to sort of trying to organize in my high school, right? And thinking about what does it mean to have a say in my school environment, to have others have a say in the school environment, in our curriculum. All of those experiences, right, have really taught me to remain hopeful. And like Dolores said, have faith in people, right? And have faith that they're the best experts, right, in their own lived experience and the solutions needed to sort of demand justice. And if only we, relied on that, and if we leaned into those experiences and centered those voices, that we could really achieve what we all really want, which is a transformed society and liberation for all of us, right? Again, that only happens, though, if we continue to have faith in people. And so I find my own kind of hope, in that space of like just remembering what it took for someone like my mom to survive. Right? To come to a new country, to not know the language, but to sort of to demand space when other people thought she didn't deserve it or didn't need it, or maybe that she didn't really understand what was going on, right? That she really stood up and became that model for me, and that model really sets people up like me to sort of grow up in a world where we feel like maybe things are impossible, right? Things keep happening and systems keep weighing down on us, but that despite that, people have learned to survive, and they will continue to survive. And it's our job to continue to lean into that challenge and making sure that we are always demanding full justice. And justice can only be served if those most impacted are at the center of that.
So I'm asked a lot about how I chose to become an activist and everything like that. And I really think for a lot of people, it's not that they chose to be an activist, it's that they had to become for their own survival and for their friends' survival. And for me, survival was really quite literal in my circumstance. School pulled me out of my classroom and told me that my dad was in the midst of a shooting at LAX, Los Angeles International Airport. And the look in my single day in my life, but I remember the one thing that she told me was to make sure I didn't tell anybody in the classroom, because from that moment is really when I began to really dislike the sense of having to be silent, to be quiet about issues. But okay, flash forward four years later. This was last year, February 14th, 2018. I now live in Florida. I was sitting in my classroom and the fire alarm went off. So we were excited because we're like, okay, it's a fire alarm drill. We get to go home early, whatever. So we went downstairs and then we began to hear gunshots. And the moment that really everything kicked in for me was when I saw people running. And remember, it was Valentine's Day, so I saw people, my friends, my classmates, running with roses and teddy bears, and a day that was supposed to be filled with so much love, in a flash turned into the day filled with the most hate I've ever seen. So I went back to my classroom. We ran back, practically tumbling over each other to get back to the classroom and to hide in the corner. And once again, I was surrounded by that silence. And that silence was a barrier for me. It was really a barrier in trying to survive, right? And I remember just sitting there wanting to scream. So I sat there in my classroom in the silence, and we watched on my friend's phone that was muted a helicopter footage over my school. And then soon enough, unfortunately, we began to get texts and messages from my friends who were in the building where the shooting was happening. And the worst was actually the videos. I saw videos of my good friends, my classmates, our teachers bleeding out on the floor. And to be silent while watching something so horrific is the worst feeling you could ever imagine. And I knew from that moment on that I never wanted to be silent again, because my silence, it felt as though was the reason that this happened to my school. It felt as though that my silence, since I was 9 years old, was the reason that this happened at my school, in my city, to my friends. And I knew that I couldn't let that go on any longer. So starting the next day, I was anything but silent. I just started talking to every single newscaster I could find, every single camera I could find to speak out on this issue, because when I saw my friends' faces on the TV the day that I got home from school, I thought about growing up, and I've grown up in a time where I was literally born after Columbine, and I've seen Sandy Hook happen and all these other mass shootings happen, and even local shootings where there's people's faces, but it's almost human to think of them as characters and not as people, because it's almost too much of an emotional burden on ourselves to think that this is something that happens in the United States. So I started speaking out, and soon enough, me and 15 other, I think it was, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas students, my high school, were sitting on our friend's living room floor, and we decided to have a march in DC protesting against this type of violence. And we thought we would have like 200 people there, right? We thought it was just gonna be like our school. We're like, do you think the student government kids will come? And it was this whole thing. But luckily, with the use of social media, if you have kids, you yell at your kids for being on their phones too much. That's what really helped us start this movement, was being on our phones too much. I'm not kidding, yes. So using those tools that we've had, we brought together a nation somehow. It's almost like a blur in my mind. It was really going on the news and just hundreds of phone calls and working until we literally fell asleep in a mass group on the floor of organizing in my friend's house in his living room. We somehow organized the largest demonstration against gun violence the United States has ever seen in DC. I think the real thing that was my biggest barrier was myself, like you guys were saying. Sometimes it is yourself that is the biggest barrier, and thinking, I don't know how to do this. Just remember, if you ever think you don't have the power or the knowledge to do something in regards to social justice, I was 14. So I didn't even take an American history class at a high school level when I did this. So don't let that hold you back. Just overall, I think in a time, in a nation where silence is almost the status quo, speaking out on any issue that you care about is really in itself an act of rebellion, an act of resilience. So I just ask of you, please go out and actually speak on issues that you care about and never let that silence impede yourself as a being, and just continue forward.
My question is, where does love, empathy, and vulnerability fit in with these movements? And how do we grasp that and cultivate that instead of perhaps our anger? Is there a place for that? Is my question.
We have to lead with authentic demand, meaning the organizer just doesn't, choose the strategies and tactics, meaning the community has to be involved in that process of choosing their own strategies, of debriefing. We have to let people to reflect on the actions that they've taken and what they've learned from that, right? What feelings that they're sitting with. Making time for each other between the individuals who are organizing, so they're checking in with each other, but the organizer's job is also to build its leaders, so sitting with leaders, giving critical feedback from a place of love, right?
There's a slogan from the great president of Mexico, Benito Juarez, and he had the slogan, his saying, that I think every Latino family knows, and I'm going to say it in Spanish, el respeto al derecho ajeno es la paz. In English, that means respecting other people's rights is peace. How many children you want to have? I had 11. But if you don't, my daughter Juanita likes dogs. She doesn't like kids, okay? Only nephews and nieces, okay? But that is a woman's right. That is her human right. Who you want to live with, who you want to marry, if it happens to be somebody of the same sex, that is your human right. And we should not intrude on that. And so respecting other people's rights is peace, okay? Respecting other people's rights is peace. And then respecting, and even when we are dealing with the haters, I would just say this, we don't want to return their hate with more hate, We have to try to return their hate with understanding. And we can pray that their ignorance is somehow removed, right? That they get illuminated, but then we have to try not to reciprocate with hate, because if we do, that just means that the hate grows. And so we've got to make sure that love grows and respect grows and humanity grows.
On the idea of hate and love and optimism, pessimism, I just want to say, from my experience, March for Our Lives was not born really at the most optimistic time for a lot of us. It was a day after a lot of us lost our friends, our teachers, and our classmates to gun violence, literally being shot and murdered in the halls where we talk, have conversations, everything else. So I think if I'm being honest, we were not optimistic. I'm completely honest about that. After what happened to us, we weren't optimistic. We were completely pessimistic. But the difference is that we were productive pessimists. We weren't passive pessimists. So many P words. So I think it's okay to be pessimist. It's okay to have this anger, frustration inside of you, but you have to be productive with it. Because that's the only way that, at least in my experience, anything has been done, is by being a productive pessimist. And also, really fast, I just want to say, like, on the education standpoint, I've been fortunate enough to have an education where I've learned about different amazing activists who created change in their own community. And a good example of this is in my Spanish class a couple years ago, actually. We had a chapter that was on Cesar Chavez and Dolores. And we learned like the word for rights and everything else. But having those people to look up to has really been what I find my love in, is looking to those people to see the boundaries that they transcended. And it's really hard for me to think about that because I had Spanish with my friend Jamie Guttenberg, who passed away last year at my school, and to think that they also read about people like you and Caesar and Martin Luther King and everything else. It really, I truly believe that if we had more education on these change makers, these monuments in social justice, I truly believe that the world would be a better place.
So I think a lot about how we define power, who is powerful and who is courageous, because I think the people who are most resilient and most oppressed are actually the most powerful and courageous. But how do we flip it? And how do we get people to push through that sense of apathy to act in a time when we aren't acting enough?
Yeah, but then tell people about, we demonstrate to people, number one, to convince them that they have power and that they don't need somebody to come in and solve their issues for them. And we say to them, the power is in your person. This is all the power that you need. It's in your person, but you can't do it by yourself. You've got to have other people join you. You've got to form a group. You've got to form an organization to make this happen. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And the other thing is that you have to be responsible, because if you do not join in, if you do not take action to solve your particular issue, it's never going to get solved. You know, so you've got to understand that you're the one that has to step up and do whatever, volunteer to do whatever it takes to solve this issue.
Women have always been the bedrock of our communities, right, and have usually not gotten the credit that they deserve. And increasingly, I think we're in an era where we're starting to recognize those contributions much more, and we're giving permission for young women particularly to sort of step up into that space and to be leaders and to be supported in that. But I think if I reflect on my own leadership, I think it was all women who really inspired me to step up into the scene, right, and to sort of be a part of something greater than myself, right?
And so my question is how to not feel tired when that is what you're feeling, how to keep having conversations. How else do I say that? How to continue to be aware and be a person, but also knowing when to break for your own mental health. Where is that line? And how do you, as what I see as experts, you're ahead in the level, in that, how do you manage that?
My organization, like I stated earlier on, was founded by a bunch of, excuse my language, like pissed off teenagers on their phones. So I really know what it's like to be tired from social media, and especially because gun violence, for some reason, is seen as such a divisive issue. Which really, I don't understand how saving lives could be a divisive issue, but honestly, all I can say is, one, like set limits for yourself. Myself trying to get better at this, like give yourself at least like 3 hours where you're not on social media, just not on social media. And also just read a book. Go outside, do things that people used to do. Like, honestly, like as somebody that is 15 years old right now, I can't even drive yet. I should be able to in like 10 days. But just honestly, go outside, plant some plants. Like, I love planting plants. Get away from that, because I've really seen what social media can do to someone. I myself, it kind of perpetuated the struggles that I was having, especially during the grieving process, because after what happened at my school, I was going through the grieving process of like multiple losses that I had, and dealing on top of that with people saying that I wasn't a real person, saying that I was a crisis actor. Dealing with a lot of that. The worst is especially when you lose close friends and somebody tells you that they weren't even real. Dealing with the darkest, deepest, most intolerant people on the internet is something that's really, really, really not great for mental health. But I think like all I can recommend is set limits for yourself. Talk to a therapist. I love my therapist. And just go outside and do things that people used to do before social media. This is one that at least because a lot of the activism that I do, or all activism, deals with a lot of heavy topics, especially when every single day, every single weekend, because I'm still in school, I go to communities like my friends on the south, work with my friends on the south side of Chicago or in the Bronx that deal with this every single day. A trait that is looked over a lot in activism, I think, or by the external world, is comedic relief. So honestly, there's been days where the only thing that has gotten me through the day has really been like comedic relief. And not like inappropriate comedic relief, but like respectful, like just funny things. And I mean, like, I'm usually with fellow young people, so there's a lot of jokes that we have. Yes. And then secondly, let me think. I think really just like being able to talk to people is the best trait that I've had.
But also like just moving forward, right? Like building the kind of cross-movement solidarity to show up for each other in meaningful ways. And solidarity, you know, I'm listening a lot and reading the writings of Deepa Iyer, who's an amazing activist that you all should be following on Twitter. And she has a podcast called Solidarity Is, right? And she talks a lot about solidarity as a practice. Like, it's not an act that you do one time to show up for March for Our Lives or the World Refugee Day thing. It's something that you're showing up consistently. And it's a practice, meaning that you have intentional relationships with people from that organization or from that community, and your act is consistent. It's not a one-time transactional thing, because you can pat yourself in the back for showing up for a rally or something like that. So, you know, in the ways that we show up consistently for the work that keeps us moving, right? In the places that give us hope, right? Because Twitter and social media, yeah, it is kind of depressing, but like our outlet, it should be our movement work and the things that keep us motivated and give us hope for the future. That's where we should be putting our energy. And it's a practice, you got to keep doing it, right? You have to be consistent about it. And so if we can do more of that, if we can just elect good people, right, we will all win.
I'm just going to try to pull together what I think I heard. And I'm sure I will miss a lot, but just to recap and reflect a little bit. So in building movements for change, what I heard was start with yourself. You are powerful, you are brave, you're resilient, you're strong, and you're a role model. Ask for help, and that's a part of being powerful, is understanding when you're not powerful and when you're vulnerable and when to ask for help. Start small. 4 to 6 people in your living room is all you need. And then recruit. Don't cannibalize each other. Be true to your mission. Be planful. Communicate. Educate. Make laws. And above all, have hope and faith and love. Thank you so much.
I would like to ask the audience a question, and I want them to answer me with a really loud voice. And the question that I'm going to ask you, who has the power? And I want you to say, we have the power. And when I say, what kind of power? I want you to say, people power. But I want you to shout it so loud that the neo-Nazis can hear us, okay? The white nationalists, the homophobes, you know, the misogynists, the sexual harassers, the bigots, okay? So that they can hear us, okay? So, are you ready? Yeah. Okay, let's go. Who's got the power? We have the power. What kind of power? People power. So after this wonderful panel, what are we going to do? Are we going to go out there? Are we going to organize? What do we say? And I would like to say it in Spanish. Sí se puede, which means yes, we can. So what do we say? Are we going to go out there and organize? Sí se puede. We talk about, let's do it with an organized hand clap all together. Unify. Sí se puede. Sí se puede. Sí se